Hey, it's Martha Hopkins, Mrs. Hopkins 73 on YouTube, and this is episode 5 of Echo on the Beach, a recap podcast of Echo Beach episodes. And I'm calling this one Flirty Bachelors. Finn's trailer park has a big stack of burned and damaged furniture right outside his office door. Ian's on oxygen and being highly monitored at the hospital. Jackie holds his hand and prays at his side. In her room, Grace peels off her sheer tank and throws it on the ground with much anger and regret boiling out of her. Dan is having his morning jog on the beach and approaches an old lover's heart carving on the beach cave wall, and it has the initials D+S carved out. He caresses it and looks like he's gained some hope in his spirit. In the Penn Warden's kitchen, Mark starts chatting about Finn's business. And Susan says, "Can we focus? A man could die." That could be the fate for Ian. Jimmy teases Grace for being hungover. Susan tells Mark she's going to pop in on Ian and Jackie at the hospital. Grace asks how he's doing. Susan admits he's not good, with severe lung damage. Mark continues as if not hearing Susan. He's not out of the woods yet. Grace looks even more worried. Mark asks Susan to pick him up some beers on her way back. She rolls her eyes at him and leaves. Grace starts dry heaving and runs off to be sick. Mark thinks it's funny and says, "You shouldn't drink so much, princess." Jackie asks the doctor if it's a good sign that Ian made it through the night. He just nods and says he'll be back in an hour. Dan is in Waves Cafe trying to talk Angela into a juice because he hasn't gotten the hang of the cappuccino machine. Angela starts flirting with Dan, then spins into a brag about her being a writer. Bray catches her flirting with his dad and quietly stares. Dan asks for help with the machine, but he excuses himself, says he'll be back. Dan knocks off an essential piece of the machine, and Angela smiles at his being so clumsy and clueless. Susan and Jackie are hugging in the hospital lobby. Susan tells her she bought her some food, then Jackie says she can't eat. Susan reassures her that she needs to keep her strength up. Jackie boldly asks her, "What if he dies?" Susan firmly responds, "He won't die," then insists they go eat something. In the Wrecker's arms, Charlie is telling Narinda that Jimmy is going to ask Abby out. She says she thought it was a dibs deal. Charlie says he's a mature man now. He can put his friends first and be a bigger man. Narinda says Abby liked Jimmy more. Charlie looks fine, ready to move on. He recognized that she wasn't right for him. Narinda looks very pleased. Charlie says he's sure the right girl for him is out there somewhere. Narinda says she's sure she is and applauds his newfound maturity. Charlie thanks her. Narinda invites him over tonight to watch a Bollywood zombie movie on TV. That almost sounds like Thriller. Charlie says no, he should spend more time with his tata, Grandpa. Finn, you know. Narinda says, "Yeah, poor Finn." Charlie is charmed by the idea of the movie. Narinda and Charlie start to flirt. Mark is playing his guitar on the couch with some headphones on. He spots Grace throwing away some clothes in the trash can. Mark gets the truth out from Grace. She tells him she started the fire. Dan's serving a tray of smoothies and spills one all over a table and on the lap of a young boy wearing an Old West sheriff's hat. The kid makes a gun shape with his fingers to aim at Dan. Dan plays along and begs, "Don't shoot!" as Abby swoops in and says they'll replace them right away. Dan offers some free fries, and Abby will be the one to serve them next time, so the kid nods yes. Back at the counter, Abby brings up the rumor that the ladies are sniffing around her dad, and she heard it from Bray that some woman was flirting with Dan. Dan confirms that she was. Abby tells him not to blush. It's embarrassing. Dan asks Abby, "If I was to see someone one day, what would you think?" Abby says, "You have to meet people, right? I know you do, but you shouldn't want to." I guess both kids are weirded out with that idea. Grace is bawling, saying she didn't know it was going to explode. It was an accident, and what if he dies? Mark tells her he won't, and the worst thing they can do is panic. Grace thinks maybe she should tell the police. Maybe they'll see it was an accident. Mark advises her not to tell the cops, not to tell anyone else. He adds if they need to, they could take a holiday to Spain, but no one else needs to know about this. Grace looks like she trusts her daddy's judgment and hugs him, but continues crying. Jackie and Bray are sitting in the hallway outside Ian's room, while Susan is getting more info from the nurse. Jackie states she hates hospitals, and Bray agrees, realizing he hasn't been in one since... Jackie figures it out. Your mother. She strokes his hand to comfort Bray and thanks him for saving Ian's life. Waves Cafe is having a quiet spell around 3 o'clock, so Abby is relaxing, sitting on the edge of the pool table. Jimmy approaches from behind, and she thinks he's there to eat. He awkwardly admits he's not there for that, but he had a great idea that maybe they should go on a date soon. Abby says it's not exactly the theory of relativity. Jimmy asks, so do you want to? Abby says, sure, I'll try anything once. Jimmy grins and says, I'll remember that. Abby bites her lip and says, tonight. Yeah, I can manage it. Jimmy says, good. Abby flashes her bright smile. Susan leans on the wall of Ian's hospital room. Jackie is talking to Ian, who's sleeping. She's sharing some fond memories, and Susan listens to the beautiful details. Ian starts gasping for air with his oxygen mask on. So then Jackie panics and takes it off. Oh, gosh. Susan rushes to push the nurse alert button. He runs in and places the mask back on. Jackie cries, and Susan comforts her. Charlie is helping Finn clean up more of the damage. Charlie says the fire insurance should help get things in order. He has good insurance, doesn't he? Finn admits he let the payment slip, and Charlie expresses his concern. Finn tells him he'll sell to Mark. So Mark does come right at that second right there. He shows up out of the blue. They both tell Mark to buzz off. They need to clean up. Jackie's tearfully asking the nurse what happened with Ian. The nurse says he thinks it's a good sign. Ian opens his eyes, sees Jackie, and says, lovely. She quickly hugs him, and Susan looks on happily. Dan and Bray help out with cleaning Finn's trailer park, as well as some other guys. Jackie and Susan roll up in Susan's convertible. Finn asks her, how is Ian? Jackie answers, he's okay. Susan and Dan's eyes meet, but they don't speak, even though Dan gives her a little grin. Bray comes closer to Jackie and tells her, that's really great. News about Ian. Jackie changes the subject and says she came to get a change of clothes. Grace is resting on her bed. Then Mark comes in to give her the great news. Ian's going to be all right. Dan and Bray go back to Waves for supper. Dan brings up the flirt session Bray happened to see. And does he want to talk about it? Bray is depressed and says, whatever. Dan says he's 40 years old, which, contrary to belief, is quite young. He claims he misses their mom more than they know. Bray says he never says it anymore. Dan says he always does. Bray is now crying and thinks they all pretend they don't care anymore, like they're over it. Bray says he's not over it and he doesn't want to be. Dan hugs him and says they aren't over it, but maybe they're trying too hard to be. Grace is happy again now, asking Mark if he's going to tell Mom. Mark tells her it's their little secret. Jimmy looks all ready for his date, and Mark notices. Grace tells Mark Jimmy's got a date, and she knows who with. Jimmy looks at Mark nervously. Angela and Susan are in the Wrecker's Arms bar. Susan tells her, "Thank you for meeting me. I just can't go home yet." Angela says, "Looks like you've had an awful day." Susan says, "Yeah, poor Jackie." Angela, with no concern about Ian, asks, "How's Mark?" Susan sarcastically answers, "These days it's a case of who's Mark." I imagine him doing things that are... and I think I'm going crazy. Angela, with beady eyes, asks, "Like what? Not an affair?" Susan says, "I guess. He keeps getting these calls he doesn't take in front of me." Angela responds, "Well, check his phone bill." Susan says, "I don't want to seem like some paranoid woman. Anyway, it's not about Mark. It's me. When I was at the hospital seeing Jackie willing for Ian to live, loving him so much, seeing that, it made me think how I'd be if it was Mark who was dying." Angela asks, "How would you be?" Norinda's in her room, staring at a photo of her parents with her brother. She pulls out a flip phone and is about to call someone. Charlie knocks on the door. "It's me. No zombies tonight?" She hides the photo and smiles. Tells him to come in. Norinda lies and says she made plans, but she can cancel if he begs a little bit. Charlie grins and says, "Please?" Norinda says, "That'll do. Let's go." They look so cute together. Jimmy is pissed at Grace for squealing to their dad. Mark says, "This isn't going to happen, Jimmy. Not with her." Jimmy says, "When will you drop this, Dad? I like her." Mark says, "You can have any girl in town. Just let this one slide." Jimmy yells, "No!" Susan comes in to witness this argument and wants to know what's going on. Jimmy fills her in. Mark gets vicious. "You're not going, and that is final." Jimmy asks, "And if it's not, if I go?" Mark tells him, "You don't want to see what happens then, Jimmy. Trust me, you really don't want to see that." Mark continues, "You don't know what a bad choice can do to people. A bad decision when you're young can screw up the rest of your life." And he's pointing his wicked finger at him. Susan has a supportive hand on Jimmy's shoulder, but he's livid and walks away. Susan stands up for him. "Mark, it's just a date." Mark scolds her and wants her to talk to him, make him see what a bad idea it is. Susan stares at Mark angrily. Susan goes into Jimmy's room to have their chat. Susan notices the smell of cigarettes and a hole in Jimmy's duvet. Jimmy tells her Grace is the cause of both. Susan calms Jimmy down, also asks him not to go out tonight. Jimmy says he likes Abby. He's going. Susan says she knows, but just tonight to choose the family. Jimmy gets frustrated and states he wishes just once she'd stand up to him. Susan says, "Trust me, now's not the right time. Your dad and Dan have got so much history. Please, Jimmy, I need you to do this, just for me." Abby is in her room putting makeup on for her date. Susan walks out to the den, but now she's in a dusty rose dress. Mark sees her and asks, "Well?" Susan says, "I talked to him. Mark says he wants to keep this family together. He doesn't want to hurt anyone." Susan says, "You do." "I'm going out. I gotta drop some stuff off to Jackie." Abby is at the end of the dock, waiting for Jimmy. She shuffles her feet nervously. Jimmy is brooding on his bed, then gets up to look for Susan. Abby looks fed up, waiting. Clearly recognizes she's been stood up. Jimmy asks Mark where Susan is. Mark just blurts, "Out." Jimmy runs to the dock, but Abby is nowhere to be found. Dan's sitting on the table in his empty shop. Susan walks towards him, and he's shocked to see her. Susan says, "I don't even know why I'm here." Dan says, I'm glad you are. Dan adds, I went to the cave. Dan loves Susan. It's still there. Susan whispers, I know. Dan asks if she goes there. Susan whispers, sometimes. Dan says he was looking at her the other day and felt born again for the first time since Rebecca died. Susan gets closer. Dan, don't. He asks, why not? Susan says, because I'm trapped in something that's more awful by the second. Dan massages her arms and says, look at you, you're shaking. Jimmy pops his head in the doorway, but isn't seen, yet he can see what's going on. Susan asks, you think it's so simple? It's not. It's a nightmare, and you don't even understand. Dan wants her to explain it to him. Susan says, I can't. Dan teases her in a playful way. They gaze at each other's eyes and kiss very sweetly. Jimmy watches in disbelief, then quickly walks off. Susan strokes Dan's face, and her eyes are smiling. They are in total bliss. That is the end of episode 5. I called it Flirty Bachelors because Charlie, Dan, and Jimmy all have flirting going in their favors. Angela and her manipulative pulling of Susan's strings made me very uneasy to this very day. I'm so glad that Angela's flirting with Dan didn't go further than what was imagined here. So thank you for coming back to hear episode 5. If you like what you heard, hit the like button and the notification bell. Thanks. Bye.